Is watching this development, and remember that last week the first group of men made their way back to South Africa. There were about 4 of them, and as we were speaking even to the Department of International Relations at the time, they were telling us that they could not confirm the timelines as far as the second batch of men that are expected to arrive back in the country is concerned. And Ayanda Mhlongo, our colleague, is on standby, and I'm not sure if Ayanda is able to hear me at this time. As we understand, of course, we have been monitoring the developments here. Ayanda is one person who also has been in conversation with some of the families of the men there who have been giving her some gut-wrenching stories and, of course, emotional scenes even at the time as they were telling her about what really led some of their children, according to them, to Ukraine. And you'd remember this is a group of men who were trapped on the front line in Russia's war with Ukraine, and now arriving back home, it must be surreal for them. They had been sending us SOS messages in order to try and get some assistance in order to be brought back home. And I want to see if Ayanda is able to hear us at this time. Ayanda, if you're able to hear us, let's talk about this significant moment, because these are the men whose families have been waiting for them to arrive. And I suppose this is now the last group.
Bongi, a very good evening to you and good evening to our viewers. Live now is we are outside the airport here at the King Shaka International Airport, and what we had said earlier on to our viewers in terms of the process, Bongi, that was going to happen once these men touched down in South Africa was that they were then going to be processed by the authorities. You'd note or remember that when the 4 men arrived last week at Johannesburg's O.R. Tambo airport, even before they were able to meet with their families and supporters, they were then whisked to the police station where they had to then make statements and engage with the authorities. And so this is a similar process that we are seeing. We were told on arrival that as soon as the men arrive, they are not going to meet with their families or have any interaction with their families. They are then going to be led into this police station where the investigators who are leading the investigation into this matter, as you know, Bongiwe, that there were 2 criminal cases that were opened. In fact, one of the cases was opened by former President Jacob Zuma's eldest daughter, Nkosazana Zuma, where she alleged and accused of 3 individuals, including her sister Duduzile Zuma Sambudla, as one of the individuals that recruited these men to Russia. I did also get an opportunity, Bongiwe, to speak to, there are 1 or 2 family members that are here, not ready to speak to us on camera, but I can tell our viewers that they are absolutely elated. In fact, one of the mothers just broke down as she saw them through the glass, and she said that she's not in a space to speak to us now, but she is absolutely delighted that her son and others have finally returned home. Of course, this has been an agonizing 7 months, Bongiwe. These men left South Africa in July last year under the pretense that they were going to receive training for private security in Russia. And it's upon arrival in Russia instead that they were given military uniforms, they were given military IDs, they were meant to sign contracts which we understand were written in Russian, and 3 weeks after their arrival they were then sent to fight, deployed with the Russian forces. You know, what the families have been telling us throughout this 7 months is that some of these men, in fact most of them, Bongiwe, never had any military or police experience at all. And so for them, they were given weapons, they were given firearms, high caliber firearms, they were given explosives. all of which they had never been able to handle. And the family saying that had they known that this was in fact what was going to happen to them, that they would have never allowed these men to go off to Russia. They're extremely grateful given the harrowing stories that these men have been relaying to their families. They have been able at times to send through messages and where they were explaining what was happening on the front lines. They were seeing people being killed and just being in a completely different country, Bongiwe, in the middle of a war, something that they had never experienced. There was language barriers and also at some point with winter and the temperatures at minus zero, and so all of these were conditions that these men were unfamiliar with. And today is such a moment for these families that have been waiting. Just before coming on air, I spoke to a mother that we as the SABC have been speaking to for months. She is in Nkandla as we speak, and she has also said that she has been watching our live coverage and just to express her gratitude. The families have expressed their gratitude to the South African government, to President Cyril Ramaphosa, who intervened, and the discussions that he had with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Of course, we know, Bongiwe, and let me step out of shot so that our viewers can see, not much, but you know what is happening here inside. They are with the police, as we are able just to see through the glass. And of course, Bongiwe, it's still going to be a long road ahead, as we know that, as I mentioned, there is this investigation, with the investigations that are ongoing, and the presidency, in the statement that was issued a few days ago, did say that the South African authorities are continuing to work closely with their Russian counterparts to investigate the circumstances that led to the recruitment of these young men into what the South African government, Bongiwe, has described as mercenary activities. The families have been telling us that they didn't know, and they've been adamant to say that these men were not mercenaries, that these were young men who were desperate for jobs, who were recruited and lured, and the pretenses that they were going to then get this specialized training to be bodyguards, and then they would be brought home after a year, and then they would then be employed as bodyguards. Many of these men did not have jobs at the time, and you remember in our reports, Bongiwe, we did also indicate, as we've been telling the story, that some were actually given amounts of money between 40 and 80,000 rand before they left. And they were saying that, of course, when they saw this money, they believed the story that they were indeed going to get some financial benefits at the end of this training. So this brings now an end to a very, very long and difficult chapter. But of course, Bongi, we must mention that the numbers now that have now arrived safely in South Africa is 15 men. We do know, of course, that 17 men from KwaZulu-Natal left on the 8th of July last year. There are still 2 men that are still stuck in Russia. One, we understand, is still in a hospital in Moscow, and the other is being processed. And once his travel arrangements have been finalized, he will then make his way home. We don't yet have an indication as a date as to when the 2 outstanding men will arrive home. You might have seen in our visuals, as well as they were coming out of the airport, that one of them is in a wheelchair, and another two others appear to be injured or have some sort of injury. They were limping as they made their way from the airport here to the police station. So that is the situation now, Bongi, with great relief and excitement for the families after a traumatic, very, very traumatic and very long ordeal. The stories that these men have told us as the SABC and have been telling their families have been absolutely horrific. What we don't know is yet, Bongiwe, is how long they're going to be here. You'd imagine that there are 11 of them, and they now each need to make statements to the authorities and provide whatever details that the investigators will want from them. When we arrived here, we did see the team of investigators. In fact, they they entered the airport, and they are part of the police officers that brought these men. So it's still going to be quite some time that they're going to be here inside this airport. We don't know what the plan is going to be. Of course, as we know, they do come from different parts of the province. Some family members are here, others are not. And so we're not too sure in terms of the time that they're going to spend here, but we do expect that it is going to be a considerable amount of time. We understand they will not leave here until those statements have been made to the police. Thereafter, then they will then release them to their families. As we're saying, Bongiwe, that this is still going to be a long way ahead for these men. We still don't know in terms of the authorities whether there's any criminal charges that will eventually be laid against these men, whether the state will take any action against them. The South African Constitution is very clear about South African citizens participating in foreign conflicts, and so at this point we're still awaiting the authorities obviously to finally decide in terms of what is going to happen. Are these men going to face any consequences for them having being part of these mercenary groups or not? That we'll still have to await the authorities on the final decision, I suppose, once their investigations have been concluded. But what I can say, a joyous day, Bongiwe, for some of the families. I just wish that our viewers would be able to see them, but they did ask for some privacy, and now at the appropriate time they will then speak to us, members of the media. Bongiwe?
And Ayanda, as you speak about the many questions right now, I mean, there have been questions that have been asked. Is there a possible human trafficking ring that is doing this? And how then does the government ensure that this doesn't happen in the future? But, you know, all these questions, I suppose, even as the minister was speaking to us last week, that we are going to be getting some answers. But I want us to take our viewers just a step back. You've been you know, following the story quite very closely. You've spoken to a lot of the families. You've had conversations. Let's talk about the men, because as you described for us, one in hospital, others are injured. This also tells a story of what they've had to go through, where they come from.
Absolutely, Bongiwe. The stories that these men were telling us, I mean, throughout the 7 months, at times I was receiving voice messages from them. They were only able to communicate via WhatsApp at times where there was when there was a signal. And you could at sometimes even hear in their voice notes what sounded like gunfire and bombs exploding in the background. And they would be saying, "Can you hear? Can you hear?" I remember at one point getting a voice note from one of the men, and he said to me, please send this message to my family that this might be the last time. You might be the last person that I speak to. Tell my mother and tell my siblings that I love them, and I'm not sure whether or not I'll come home. And moments later, I was then sent, he then sent me a location, Bongiwe, of where he was, and he seemed to be somewhere in the Donbass region in Ukraine. And so it's been absolutely difficult. And I obviously have been speaking to them when we are able to, but the families have been in constant communication with these men. We know that there was a mother, Bongiwe, that ended up being hospitalized due to, you know, what she was going through, and she just couldn't deal with the fact that her son was in this situation. Bongiwe, these are men that trusted, that told us, and the family said they trusted the individuals that recruited them. They believed that they were indeed giving them a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You'd imagine, Bongiwe, you come from the rural area of Nkandla where there are no jobs, where you have matriculated but you're unable to get a job, and here comes this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you to go to Russia to train. You know, some of these family members were telling us, Bongiwe, that these men love to be police officers. They actually, some wanted to be soldiers, some wanted to be police officers, and so when this opportunity came, they jumped at it. their documents were quickly processed by the individuals that are said to be behind this scheme, and then they left the country. It's only when they got to Russia that, of course, they started to pick up red flags in terms of what was happening there when they received the military uniform, and thereafter they were then separated into groups of 2 and groups of 3, and then they were then attached to Russian soldiers, and off they went into unknown territory. So it has really, Bongiwe, been quite a difficult situation. The mothers, the fathers, the brothers, the sisters saying that those that recruited the men used their desperation, used the fact that these are people that wanted jobs, that were desperate for jobs, that saw an opportunity and jumped at this opportunity to be able to get this training, and on the promise that they would then return back to the country a year later, and they would then get employment as bodyguards or private security. And I think the big thing here, Bongiwe, is they trusted these individuals. Some, we understand, actually spent quite a considerable amount of time with the families, supporting the families when they went to take to do their passports, etc. These individuals are said to have sponsored that. They took them from Nkandla. Some were brought to the Home Affairs in Durban. Others were taken to the Home Affairs in Pietermaritzburg. And all of that was financed by the individuals that are said to have recruited these men. So it all looked good, I would say, as they say, Bongo, it all looked good on paper. And it's only when, obviously, they then left and arrived in Russia that things turned south. And it honestly has, from them, been a really, really long and traumatic experience. And there are many times, Bongiwe, when they believed and their families believed that they would never make it home alive. You know, one of the 4 men, Bongiwe, that arrived last week, I was just speaking to his aunt, and she was saying to me that, of course, they are very extremely traumatized, but she was even saying that when he arrived at home, he was touching the trees and the plants, he was touching the soil because he was in disbelief that he was finally home. So, and I think that is just evidence of what these men went through, and at a point they'd completely given up that they would ever be able to make it home and make it home alive. And so the families have also extended their appreciation and gratitude to the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola, and his team, and of course to President Cyril Ramaphosa, who made a commitment to these families that he would work with his Russian counterparts to ensure that they get home safely. And indeed, while some may be battered and bruised, Bongiwe, but I think for them, it's better to be battered and bruised, but you are finally home, you are finally safe. And in terms of, what might happen, and we were saying here, Bongiwe, that they understand that there is this investigation, but the family said they would rather have them imprisoned in South Africa than them to be in some foreign country and not knowing whether or not they'd ever make it back home. And so much relief on the faces of these men who are now finally home. And just imagine, Bongiwe, they are back home in KwaZulu-Natal on the 8th of July last year. These men left from this very airport, Durban's King Shaka airport, with the dream that they were going to Russia, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and hoping that when they come back, they were then going to be able to better their lives, to better that of their families. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be. But with the intervention of the South African government, these men are finally home. Bongiwe?
And Ayanda, one of the key questions is now going to be on these apparent recruitment networks, right? Because you speak about these individuals that the men have trusted. These are people that they say they were hoping were going to be able to secure them these opportunities, a once in a lifetime, they're describing it as. And I suppose as the authorities now begin to piece together what could have happened here, it's going to be important for the country to know who these people are, but at the same time, how then do authorities make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Absolutely, Bongo, and I think that is going to be key to the authorities, and just the manner in which they've handled, the arrival of these men, the fact that they've, the first group that arrived that we saw last week arriving at Johannesburg, OR Tambo, and how they were whisked into the police station to immediately make those statements. I must also mention, Bongo, that we did receive information that even their devices, their cell phones, were handed over to the police at that time, and one would suspect that this might happen to this group as well. These men, Bongo, are going to be very key and instrumental in this investigation. Of course, they need to then provide the authorities with information as to how they were recruited, who recruited them, as I did also mention that there were monies that some received before they left, monies between 40 and 80,000 rand, and so they would then have to, I would imagine, prove to the authorities who paid for who gave them this money, who paid them, and as to who was assisting them with all the arrangements before they left. So they indeed are very key. We did also, in our conversations with the families over the past months, we do know that some family members did make statements to the police, and one of the families, in fact, confirming to me that they had made statements to the police as early as December. And so all of those are going to be quite important and critical as the police try to uncover this syndicate. It is one, of course, Bongiwe, that the authorities will want to work on very quickly to ensure that it doesn't happen again. We've been seeing reports across Africa and countries like Kenya, where African men are being recruited by these mercenary groups to specifically to join the Russian forces. And so this and what is happening to these men, would one believe that the authorities want to ensure that they find these people that are responsible for this, and they ensure that there are no other victims or young men and women that might be allured in similar circumstances to these and find themselves in foreign lands fighting wars that they know nothing of, or they shouldn't be involved in. So I would imagine, Bongo, it's still going to be quite critical over the next coming days. These men here are going to be key to this investigation. And as I was saying earlier, that of course we are also awaiting on the authorities to then update us and the nation in terms of what is going to happen. Will any criminal charges be laid against these men? As I was saying, that the South African Constitution is very much clear in terms of South Africans participating in foreign conflicts. And so over the next coming days, and once they've received these statements from these men, and as the investigation continues, we should get a clearer picture as to what is going to happen. And in terms of those that did recruit these men, will the authorities eventually arrest them? I can tell you, Bongiwe, that the families have said and they've stressed that they want those individuals who are behind this syndicate, they want them to be arrested and for them to answer for what the families have described as their crimes against these innocent men.
Ayanda, Mhlongo, thank you so much for that. And let's continue then to watch the story through your eyes. Sterling work there at the Durban's King Shaka International Airport. We do know 11 of the men have arrived back home. Last week you saw 4. And according to what now Ayanda is telling us, in fact, 1 is currently in hospital and then another is being processed to make their way back home now. So we'll continue then to keep you updated on this developing story.